So welcome everyone to this educational experience of helping us to understand both the terms and the situations and the various nuances of the terminology, especially that we use to understand what's happening in Gaza and the West Bank right now. Last week we had the good fortune of having Reb Ron with us, and we have him back with us today. So take a moment now and allow yourself to let go of wherever you were and whatever you've been doing to get here. And now Reb Ron is going to offer us an opening prayer.
Thank you. As we all share the same God and we're all brothers and sisters, let us pray that today, as we did last time, will take away courage and understanding and be able to relate to what is going on and to help repair the world that we live in. When we read the Torah every Shabbat, every Sabbath, afterwards we chant a prayer for peace. And that is so relevant today, so I'll repeat it now. May we see the day when war and bloodshed cease, when a great peace will embrace the whole world. Then nation will not threaten nation, and mankind will not again know war. For all who live on earth shall realize we have not come into being to hate or destroy. We have come into being to praise, to labor, and to love. Compassionate God, bless all with the power of compassion. Fulfill the promise conveyed in Scripture. I will bring peace to the land, and you shall lie down, and no one shall terrify you. I will rid the land of vicious beasts, and it shall not be ravaged by war. Let love and justice flow like a mighty stream. Let peace fill the earth as the waters fill the sea. And let us say, Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much for that beautiful prayer. And now it's my great good fortune to introduce to you Dr. Mazin Qumsiyeh, who was born in the biblical shepherd's field, Beit Sahour. And I am sure that the angels sang and danced on the day he was born. He is a remarkable scholar activist who has taught on the faculties of Duke and Yale University, and he is one of the preeminent biologists of the Holy Land, of the Fertile Crescent, and he is the co-founder with his wife, Jessie Chang, of the Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability at Bethlehem University. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Mazin Qumsiyeh to talk to us about who are the Palestinians, where do Palestinians live, and also to update us on the situation in the West Bank and Gaza.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. So my own background is that I'm born in the shepherd's field near Bethlehem. My family is mixed. My parents are both Christian, but from two different sects. We're the indigenous people of Palestine, and we happen to be various religions. So I used in this couple of sentences a few terms which we have to define, like Palestine, like religion, culture, where people come from. So I'm going to try and make it fairly simple. Of course, humans evolved in Africa, specifically South Africa and East Africa, and then migrated to the rest of Africa. I'm talking about humans as Homo sapiens, the first, as Linnaeus called us, sapiens, a reasoning man or a person who can think. This evolution that happened in Africa stayed in Africa until about 150,000 years ago, when a land bridge was breached between Asia, Europe, and Africa, which is Palestine. This geographic area is in the Eastern Mediterranean region. It's a small geographic area of about 27,000 square kilometers, but it is a bridge between continents. It was actually an area of very important migratory routes for early humans, which then populated places like Asia and Europe, and of course the Americas and Australian continents. This happened, as I said, the first beginning out of Africa was 150,000 years ago. Human populations, while they spread to most of the world, at least most of the world they could reach, not some remote islands, but most of the world that they could reach was reached by about, at the, if we take the last kind of places to be inhabited by those spreading humans, was about 30 or 40,000 years ago in places like, remote areas of Europe and Americas and extreme South America, because humans migrated to North America through the Bering Strait, through Alaska, and then they started spreading further south. So the most ancient natives in North America were in the north, and then less ancient in the south. So to say that Palestine had Homo sapiens, humans, is, as I said, 150,000 years ago. There was another species of human called Homo neanderthalensis. Some people say it's not really a separate species, but certainly they were separate populations, and they intermarried at one point. But anyways, the humans that lived in Palestine between 150,000 years ago until today, as, let's say, the Aborigines in Australia that lived in Australia once humans arrived at Australia around 50,000 years ago, until today, those are people that we call indigenous people. Indigenous people, some people use term First Nations, first to inhabit an area, basically. So this is the population that inhabited this area. What did they call themselves 100,000 years ago, or even 50,000 years ago? We have no idea, of course, because writing was not invented then, and so on. Or we could surmise some aspects of their thinking, if you want, by drawings on caves and things like that. They were, as all humans, for most of the existence of our species on this planet, they were hunter-gatherers until a period in history, which is what is now called by scientists the Natufian period, referring to Wadi Natuf in Palestine, were the first evidence of transition from hunter-gatherers to agricultural and settled communities. This happened about 12,000 years ago. This is a very, very important part of human history, transition from hunter-gatherers to being able to domesticate wild plants and animals, and having basically stable food source instead of going out every day from morning to evening trying to find your foods in the woods. You either raise sheep and goats and things like that for meat. That's domestication of animals. Chickens, of course, came later, but nevertheless, same thing. And of course, domestication of plants. Again, this happened first in this part of the world where I live, which is called the Fertile Crescent. For that reason, the Fertile Crescent is an area that stretches from modern-day Iran and Iraq to Turkey and Syria in the north, and then west to Lebanon and Palestine. This is the Fertile Crescent where this transition from hunter-gatherers to agricultural communities happened. The earliest evidence of this was found with some wheat grains in this wadi called Wadi Natuf, near Tul Karim in present-day West Bank or Palestine. That's why the period is called the Natufian period of human evolution versus let's say earlier Stone Age periods or the Bronze Age and so on that came later. Okay, now having said that, I go back to this point about people, how do we know what they call themselves? Well, we don't until the invention of writing. When did the invention of writing happen? This was about 5,000 years ago, also ironically in this part of the world. Now, why, two questions. Why did the first agriculture and first domestication of animals occur here rather than, let's say, in Africa or China or anywhere else where humans were present, having spread out of Africa? That's a question that scientists have speculated on, but most scientists think it had to do with the climate and with the habitats that existed here, the presence of wild plants that are easily cultivated, wild wheat and wild barley and wild lentils, wild chickpeas. These were all available in this part of the world. And so they were domesticated by accident, probably, because, you know, when people collected their wheat from the fields as hunter-gatherers, they may have dropped a few seeds around their place of residence, and they discovered that this wheat can grow, so might as well plant it and have a stable food supply. So that happened again 12,000 years ago. The second question is, why did writing first evolve here? Well, when you think about it, when you transition from hunter-gatherer to settled communities with stable food source, the population increases dramatically. Because, you know, when you're a hunter-gatherer, you know, you may not find food and you starve to death. When you have agriculture or some sheep and goats, domesticated wild animals, then you have a stable food source, so you can build villages and towns, and eventually this is what we call civilization, quote unquote. So this presence of people in communities allowed them to evolve their thinking, evolve their art, evolve music, evolve things like writing, and this is what the essence of civilization is, right? So this area is also called the cradle of civilization. So when writing started to be practiced in this part of the world, and we deciphered those ancient writings, we could start to see places, names of places, like, for example, Canaan, the land of Canaan, as it's known in the Bible, or Bilad al-Sham, or Yemen. Those names started appearing as the earliest known location names. So when we talk about the land of Canaan, people referring to their land as the land of Canaan, it's understandable that we, in modern humans, writing history, say they were people, the Canaanites, or the Yemenites, or the people who lived in Bilad al-Sham, which is essentially equivalent to modern day Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, and Jordan. The origin of these names, by the way, is interesting in itself. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but Bilad al-Sham, or the actual origin comes from Shamal, which means both north and left, interestingly enough. And Yemen refers to the right or south. And that's because if you are anywhere in the Arabian Peninsula, from Turkey all the way south to Yemen, and you face the rising sun to the east, then Yemen is to your right, and Bilad al-Sham, or the land of Canaan, is to your left. The word Canaan, or land of Canaan, comes from Canaan, which is interpreted as people who are satisfied with their lot in life. Let's focus not on Yemen. Let's talk about, since we are coming close, talk about Palestinians. This land of Canaan, what is this land of Canaan? As I said, it's a fertile crescent, basically, north of the Arabian Peninsula, to the northern part of the Arabian Peninsula. We'll come to the origin of the word Arab if you want also. But the land of Canaan, like all native places, for example, Native Americans had tribes. Each tribe was called a different name. They called themselves different names, Apache or Sioux or whatever in North America. In Palestine, we find that the Canaanites were various tribes. They included, for example, the Phoenicians, as it's now spelled, but it's really Phoenique, as we call it, land of Phoenique, Phoenicians. There was the Jebusites is sometimes written, which is the people around Jerusalem. There were the Philistines, or Pelest, as it's originally called, which was along the coastal areas, a tribe of Canaanites along the coastal areas of Palestine. There was the Nabateans, which were in the southern part of what is now Palestine and Jordan. And there were like a dozen others, I won't go through them. But all of these tribes were Canaanites, Canaanitic people, as we know from their own writings. The Hebrews, by the way, the Abirus, were also a tribe of Canaanites. The word Hebrew comes from Abiru or Abar, root Abar, which means to cross over, because they were like Bedouins, nomads, basically moving from one place to another. The word Arab comes from the same root, same three-letter words, Ra, Ra, Ba, which means also somebody who wanders around. These were all tribes of Canaanites, the Arabs, the Nabateans, the Phoenicians, the Jebusites, the Arameans, the Philistines. All of these were tribes of Canaanites. But the whole land was called the land of Canaan. And of course, you can cross within the land of Canaan into the land of Philistines, called Pelest, or the land of the Phoenicians, called Phoenique, or the land of the Nabateans, called Nabat. The Nabats were the ones who built Petra, for example. All right, so here I dropped the word Philistines, Pelest or Phelest, which is an Aramaic segment, Aramaic-speaking Canaanitic people. Oh, all of the Canaanitic people spoke a language called Aramaic. It was the lingua de franca of the ancient world, the language of the ancient Near East, if you want, or Fertile Crescent, was the Aramaic language. It's a basic language like Latin is a basis for evolution of the Romance languages, Spanish and French and Italian. Aramaic is the original language from which evolved things like Hebrew and Assyrian and other Akkadian and other languages. But Aramaic is the root, the stock from which these languages and alphabets evolved. So to summarize, the Philistines were a segment of the Canaanites living in the land of Canaan, part that's called Philist or Palestine, and they spoke Aramaic like the other people spoke Aramaic at the time. And Jesus, of course, was born in this area, and hence he also spoke Aramaic, and he lived in a country at the time of his birth, 2,000 years ago, was called Palestine, or as the Romans called it, Palestina. But the Romans did not name it, you know. The name is much more ancient than this. In fact, we find it over 3,000 years ago, mentioned in hieroglyphics, mentioned in Mesopotamian reliefs, and mentioned in Greek literature, including by the Greek philosopher Herodotus, some 500 BC. He mentions Palestine as part of this land of Greater Syria or Bilad al-Sham. So this is what Palestine is and how the name came about. Now, I mentioned that all these people had different tribes. It doesn't mean that they were fixed, separated geographically. They were interbreeding and marrying each other, whether they were Jebusites or Nabatean or Philistines. But the area was called the land of Canaan for thousands of years. The part of it that's Palestine or Philist, if you want, Philistine, is a part that's the southern or the left part of the Fertile Crescent, south left of the Fertile Crescent. This is what Palestine is. What is the borders of Palestine? It fluctuated historically. At its smallest, it was mostly along the coastal areas running from Gaza to Jaffa and a bit to the north of Jaffa and inland towards Beer-Sheba or Beersheba, as it's called now. That's at its smallest extent, and it's it's at its largest extent. It included basically all of historic now Palestine between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean. You hear in demonstrations we sing or say, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. So that is an extent of Palestine, but it was larger than that. It included even parts to the east of the River Jordan, which is now in the Kingdom of Jordan, that's ruled by the Hashemite monarchy, if you want. So while its size fluctuated as Palestine, everybody knew where it was, and everybody wrote about it. And when it at its large extent, as I mentioned, it included territories of other tribes, not just the Philistines, but also the Jebusites, Nabateans, etc. And certainly when these were unified into one territory, it's no longer that we refer to them as separate tribes, but became one people, which is the Palestinian people, the indigenous people of Palestine. The indigenous people of Palestine who lived here 5,000 years ago or 12,000 years ago are thus the genetically homogeneous, relatively homogeneous, very little influx from outside populations. And we can look at their genetics and we can compare even modern day Palestinians with these ancient Canaanitic people that lived in what is now historic Palestine between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean. And we can find a genetic identity between, let's say, DNA from me and DNA from a bone here that dates 5,000–6,000 years ago, or even a bone in Lebanon that dates 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, because Lebanon and Palestine were part of the same Western Fertile Crescent, if you want, that arc that stretches from Palestine, what is now Israel, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran. That's a crescent. And that's also what's called Bilad al-Sham, as I said, which means the north. And there's, by the way, some people think the word Semitic languages comes from Shem, who is according to the Bible, the Old Testament, Shem is the son of Noah. After the flood, according to biblical mythology, after the flood, Noah had these children. One of them is Shem, and hence you get the so-called Shemitic or Semitic languages. This is not true, by the way. Semitic or Shemitic languages refer to the languages of the people of Bilad al-Sham, which literally comes from the Aramaic words referring to the countries to the north or the place of the north, as Yemen is the place of the south, not related to some person named Yemen or whatever. So the Semitic languages are the languages of this Fertile Crescent. What are these Semitic languages? As I said, the main original names of them are like Akkadian and Aramaic, that evolved into things like, as I said, Assyrian or Arabic or some other languages. The Arabic alphabet, for example, it evolved in the south of Palestine and the south of Jordan from the Nabatean Aramaic alphabet. The same as the Latin alphabet, the ABCs that you use, that we use in English or French or any other Western language now, that comes from the Aramaic, Proto-Aramaic alphabet of Phoenicia, or the land just to the north of Palestine, which is now Lebanon, Phoenicia. So this is basically the evolution of alphabets. The Latin alphabet comes from Aramaic that became Latin alphabet, and the Arabic alphabet evolved from the Aramaic alphabet that Jesus was very well familiar with it and became the Arabic alphabet. That's why they are connected, by the way. The A, for example, in English is basically, as you know, the shape of it. If you flip it upside down, so here's the shape of the A. If you flip it upside down, you get where its origin, which is Aleph in Aramaic, which is the bull that our ancestors used to worship and consider the primary thing, you know, the alpha and the beta. So that's the origin of the A in English. In Arabic, it's just a line with this thing stuck on top of it, a mini triangle or mini angle. That's what it is in Arabic, but they originate both from the Aleph of Aramaic, and the same with B, which comes from Beit, or a house, shape of a house. That's why it's written in English the way it's written. If you put it sideways, you get a line and a small a half circle, which is the shape of a house. So this is the evolution of alphabets. Evolution of people, as I said, the people continue to exist here for these thousands of years. Of course, the religions evolved. You can understand that from ancient hunter-gatherers who used to worship the animals they hunted and draw them on the caves and things like that, to modern religions, as we know, including the monotheistic religions. There was evolution of religions, and people acquired different religions, obviously, as they were revealed to them, as they believed in them. That's also understandable. And I find it fascinating when I follow the evolution of languages that I also can follow the evolution of religions. For example, how Islam evolved as religion post-Christianity, post-Judaism, and then within Islam, how the two different main sects, Sunni and Shia Islam, evolved, and of course others like Baha'i and Sufi Islam and so on, and how Christianity also came from one single root, following, other monotheistic traditions before it, and then it evolved to become Catholic and Protestant and this and that. That's also an evolution of thinking, an evolution of perception of individuals, of course, based on revelations, based on their understanding of what their God wants them to do, what our God wants us to do, etc. So this is regarding the history of Palestine as Palestinians, the word Palestine and Palestinians and where it came from. I won't get into the issue of Zionism and unless you want to, and what it meant for this history.
So Mazin,
Yeah.
we covered a little bit about Zionism. We covered a little bit about Nakba.
Yeah.
But can you tell us more from your perspective, the more modern period and what you have seen from your own life history?
Well, I mean, we Palestinians are 15 million people. 8.5 million of us are refugees or displaced people, including some of my own relatives, of course. And that's understandable in the context of colonialism that makes refugees and displaced people and stores them in Bantustans or ghettos. Bantustans, what they were called in South Africa, or ghettos or reservations, as they are called in North America, or missions, as they are called in Australia. So my own family history, and as the history of Palestinian families, all Palestinian families, a history of tragedy, a history of loss, a history of dispossession and ethnic cleansing, and increasing genocide, as you see happening in Gaza now, of course. And so we, as they used to say, the powerful do what they wish, and the victims must endure what they must. So that's what we have to endure. And it continues. I mean, I can tell you stories after story about our suffering, but I won't belabor the issue. But I personally lost, for example, just since 2008, 24 of my own friends who were killed by the Israelis in the West Bank, and countless people I knew in Gaza Strip that I lost count of how many in the Gaza Strip of people I knew, names I had interacted with over email and stuff because I was not allowed to go to Gaza. So the situation on the ground now is worse than ever it has been, and certainly could get even worse because the world is silent as people are butchered. There's an extermination campaign against our people that is ongoing as we speak. Just in the past 36 hours, actually, 83 people were killed in the Gaza Strip and 5 in the West Bank. But half of them are children. Half of the victims are children.
I'm certain that we can't imagine the amount of loss and suffering that you have experienced in your life. And it's incredible to me, the unwavering steadfastness and courage of the Palestinian people. It's just been such a long and brutal occupation. And I don't really know when the actual military occupation began. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, it's like asking when military occupation started in what is now the United States of America. It's a process of colonization is a process. It's not a particular date. You can set a particular date. For example, when New York was first colonized by the British, and they called it New York, or when Connecticut was first colonized. But, if you go to California, it's a different date. Colonization is always a process that takes time, and it doesn't just take the whole country all at once or occupy it all at once. So it's a methodical process. Even as I'm speaking with you, Israeli forces are marching in places in Syria that they never set foot in. So now these areas are occupied, or I prefer the word colonized, not just occupied, because the process is a colonization and not a mere military occupation. When Germany occupied France for a few years during the Second World War, that's a military occupation, and it's temporary. It's different than when British or Spanish militaries and civilians spread in North and South America, for example. That's a process that's different than a mere military occupation of an area.
Thank you for that clarity. Pat, you have a question?
Hi, yes, I do. Thank you. What I've just learned from you is the idea that the Israelis and the Palestinians are all the same peoples. And originally, all of these tribes were in this one space together and doing their thing, peaceful and not peaceful, but it didn't seem like there was any surge. So, the story of the Hebrew scriptures is that this one tribe is chosen, and it seems to be something that has caused a lot of problems because the rest of the tribes were invaded. You know, I've having a Protestant background with a lot of Bible learning in my childhood. I remember the word Canaanites as the bad guys. And Goliath, wasn't he one of those other tribes? So it's like the Jewish mindset has brought this angst into the tribal interplay. And the thing I'm thinking in my head is, oh, I'm going to sound anti-Semitic if I say this. But what I'm also seeing in you is that there is no such thing as anti-Semitic or pro-Palestinian. It's all the same people. So that's just words that makes people get their prickles up. Am I right about that? But anyway, just some feedback. Thank you.
Let me explain. I didn't, as I said, I didn't talk in the end of the part where I was talking. I was asked to talk about Palestinians and Palestine. I said I didn't talk about Israel or Israelis. The part I talked about Hebrews, Abirus, as a tribe of Canaanites. Abirus has nothing to do with Israel or Israelis. Abirus. Abiru is a tribe of Canaanites, the Hebrews. The Hebrews were a tribe of Canaanites. There's no such thing as a tribe of Israelis or Israelis, or today's Israelis. Let's talk about that since you bring it up. What is Israel, by the way? Israel is a term that is not related to a country or a nation or a tribe for that matter. It was a name that was given to Jacob and his children. In the Torah, it says Jacob changed his name to Israel because he had a dream where he struggled with his God, or some people say with the angel Jibrail, who basically he struggled with God. So he was renamed from Jacob, or Yaqub in the original Aramaic, to become Israel. Isra means struggle. El with God. El is the high God. El Elohim, you know, or Allah in Arabic, it's the high God or the highest God. So that's why he was given the name Israel as Jacob. And his children were called Beni Israel, children of Israel, children of Jacob, basically. That is, unless you want to consider that family to be a tribe, we're not talking about the same thing as I was talking about Philistines, Nabateans, etc. That's the origin of the word Israel. But if you come to the modern Israelis and modern Israel, of course, that's a totally different story, and certainly has nothing to do with Jacob or his children. Most Israelis who live in our country, in Palestine, actually are Europeans. They have nothing to do with the Middle East. They have nothing to do with the Abirus. They have nothing to do with Jacob and his sons. They are Europeans who adopted Judaism as a religion. And then they came here to set up a state called Israel, after Jacob, of course. And so they set up the state, and this state includes mostly European Jews, some Jews from other Arab countries, some Jews from Ethiopia. This is not a tribe or a community or anything like that. This is people of a particular religion who happen to be from various ethnicities, European, Ethiopian, African, Yemenites, Moroccans, Polish, Russian, whatever. They are different backgrounds genetically and in terms of their affiliation, go back to these countries. They're not a community. So when you say you understood from me that we are related, no. we're not related to Israelis. Palestinians are not related to Israelis. They're related to a segment of Israelis, which are the Palestinian Jews who trace back ancestry to the time of Jacob, if you want. And that's a tiny, tiny minority of Jews in Palestine. Most Jews in Palestine have zero genetic connectivity to the ancient Hebrews or Abirus that lived here 2,500 years ago, for example.
That was very helpful. Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I just want to thank you, Mazin, for that really wonderful presentation, but also to let people know that there was a very large Hebrew presence in what is now Palestine, certainly after the Exodus from Egypt. And they established Jerusalem and established the temple there, and were eventually thrown out first by the Babylonians. Then they were allowed to come back, and then of course the Romans. After the time of Jesus, they were expelled and they were taken across the Mediterranean into southern Italy, and from there they spread into Europe. Jews are not really indigenous to Europe, although there's been lots of intermarriage, of course, and all of that with European stock. But originally they were in Palestine and were expelled from there, were forced out, ultimately by the Romans. And that's why you still have the various Hebrew sites that are still there, you know, the Temple Wall and the various religious sites that are still there. So just to add a little bit to that. And again, thank you for that presentation.
As I said, there were Hebrews as a tribe of Canaanites. This is archaeological evidence. Was a tribe of Canaanites, a small tribe of Canaanites, which has adopted the monotheistic traditions. First, they were polytheistic, of course. Even in the Torah, there are aspects of polytheism with different, gods there mentioned, Yahweh and El and others. But anyways, religion is different than genetics. I'm a medical geneticist, and I can tell you that more than 98% of the genetics of European Jews is strictly European, have nothing to do with the Palestinian history or Palestinian or the exodus or removal of Jews from Palestine. When the Romans, for example, expelled some Jews from Jerusalem, they expelled the rebellious Jews who rose against Rome, as you know, in 63 AD. But Jews remained in Palestine. Jews, people who practiced Judaism, remained in Palestine and continued to. Some of them adopted Christianity. Some of them later adopted Islam. I know families in Hebron, who traced their ancestors to Jewish families that lived in Hebron and became Christian and later became Muslim or directly converted from Judaism to Islam. These are the local indigenous people, but certainly genetically European Jews are European, Ethiopian Jews are Ethiopian or African, and Yemeni Jews are Yemenite. Judaism is like any other religion. There were converts in other countries to this religion. And you don't have to be a geneticist like me to know this. Even physically, you can look at people like Rabin and Peres and Netanyahu, and you can tell that they are Europeans, not Middle Eastern, so to speak, physically. You can look at an Ethiopian Jew and you can tell immediately that that's a black African person, or a Yemeni is a Yemeni Jew. So it is not a genetic thing that Jews somehow dispersed from Palestine to other countries because of expulsions, etc. This is just simply archaeologically and linguistically and culturally and many other ways is proven to be not the case. Genetically, at least, we know this for sure from, sequencing DNA. We don't, you can sequence the DNA of a person from a Polish Jew, for example, and you can find that their genetics traces back to the Turkic tribes that converted to Judaism in the 9th century and 10th century AD after Jesus, or after the Common Era, if you want. So this is, I'm talking about science here, not what is stated in the mythologies of some people. The people who converted from Judaism to other religions in Palestine also, we have to realize at some point, of course, Judaism was dominant as a religion. It didn't disappear because of expulsion or get lower because of expulsion. Most of it got lower numbers because of conversion to Christianity and to Islam in Palestine as those religions evolved and spread in our country. But we were talking about indigenous people, Palestinians, who happen to be of various religions, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Baha'i, Druze. All of these are indigenous Palestinians who lived in Palestine throughout the ages, converted their religions, as happens always with, you look at spread of Islam in India and how Pakistanis became mostly Muslims, or parts of India became mostly Muslim. They were Hindu before, and you can look at how Buddhism evolved from Hinduism and all of that stuff.
Thank you, Mazin. I'm going to ask us now to segue into a little historical perspective from a very wise soul who is with us. I'd like you to all welcome Jena Zubaidi, and I'm sure I mispronounced that. It's Zubaidi? Is that better? Okay. So Jena was born in the Bay Area of Northern California, and she is a Palestinian American. 4 years ago, they moved to Dallas, Texas, where she continues her journey as an 8th grade student. And at the age of 11, Jena visited her grandparents' land in Nazareth and Safed, and the experience deeply connected her to her heritage and strengthened her bond to the land, extending beyond the stories that she'd heard from her grandfather and other relatives, and ignited in her a profound personal connection to her roots. So we are going to listen to her story now.
Hello. So my grandfather used to tell stories about Palestine as he remembered it, and these stories were passed down to my father and then to me. And in these stories, his view of the land was so different from the way it is seen often today. A land known mostly for the scars and devastation of war was once the most beautiful place that you could ever imagine. What is now pictured as gray and filled with rubble was once vibrant, bursting with vast fields of green, and it stretched as far as the eye could see, and there were valleys upon valleys and villages tucked into rolling hills, and a heritage so deeply rooted it seemed to be embedded in the people of Palestine. In my grandfather's stories, Palestine was alive with color, laughter, and most of the people who prospered in the land. In these stories, he was still able to call his house within the village and on top of the valley a home. The house, once filled with the love of his family and echoing the laughter of many. In this house, my grandfather looked out upon the greenery and the breathtaking beauty of the valley of Majd ibn Amir. In this house, he was still able to care for the olive trees which he had planted himself at a young age, and was able to watch the trunks and the tree grow. After the years, they grew, and he could feel the love and deep connection to the land and the culture of the roots underneath him. But when my grandfather was 20 years old, the occupation began in Palestine, leaving many families who had grown there and thought they would never leave displaced, and my grandfather's family was a part of them. It was said that their villages were now destroyed, and that the 40 olive trees my grandfather planted and took care of and blessed with love were cut down and replaced with other trees that is foreign to the land, and the homes were reduced to just pebble, which had once been the foundation. My grandfather was left to believe this for the 60 years he had lived away from his home. Until after all that time, he was finally given the chance to visit Palestine, the place that he once called home and will forever call home. Through pure memory and instinct, he led his way through the rubble and finally was able to find his village. And he was able to find his home as well, in the home which was now reduced to rubble and stones, and the view which was replaced to the factories and buildings. But one thing did not change, and that was the olive trees which my grandfather once planted were because they were standing right in front of him against all odds and against the fact that he had heard. The olive trees which had been replaced, which had been cut down and forced away from the roots, the olive trees which my grandfather and thousands of other people were forced to leave, but they were still there no matter what. The olive trees which represented the resilience, the strength, and the hope that is planted within us and grow no matter whether or not we are at our roots. The olive trees which represent the people of Palestine and their spirits, and show that no matter how much they destroy and how much they cut, how much they build, hope will always prevail. So many years after my grandfather was given the chance to visit Palestine, I was also able to give him the opportunity to reconnect with my roots, and I was able to visit the very place which my grandfather took care of as a young kid and was able to visit as an older man. So I was able to see the land, and I was able to recognize all the things that my grandfather described from his memories. And I had seen one thing which also had been frozen of time, just as he remembered, which were the olive trees. I was able to see around 38 olive trees as I counted, and I was able to acknowledge that there was no place on earth that had deeper meaning to me and to my family, and hopefully to many other families. This place meant victory for me, and it meant that the care and love we treated our land with were like shields against the violence that went on around it. It meant that the olive trees were not grown with seeds like the foreign ones, but they're also grown with love, something that will spread through the soil to the lands of Palestine, something that helped it regrow, and something that will also help us regrow one day, God willing.
Thank you, Jenna. That was really beautiful. There's so much to say about this particular genocide that is so unnerving. And I think for me, the most unnerving part is that it's being live streamed to us, and yet nobody seems to be able to stop it. And even in our country, like the thing I think really stood out for me was when 80 doctors testified to our Congress and Senate that children were being targeted in the head and chest. Children were being targeted and killed by snipers, and they had never seen that in any other war. And these are doctors, without borders. These are people who do this kind of work, this kind of humanitarian service. And so I think, last time in our seminar, we saw, the 211 journalists that were targeted. And now, we're seeing, this escalation of atrocities, people, just being killed in every kind of way right before our eyes. And it's something that we all need to pray about and find our voices about, and do what we can, to make it stop, because it isn't going to be beneficial for anyone. It's like when I worked in child protection, and I felt really sorry, for the child abusers who themselves were abused and traumatized people. Some of the most traumatized people I've ever met are child abusers, but they still need to be held accountable, and children need to be protected. And that is really paramount, that we stand for the rights of children to live.